Imagine standing before an enemy you cannot see, cannot smell, and cannot hear, knowing that every breath you take is quietly stealing your life away. In the spring of 1986, a group of unsuspecting workers found themselves in exactly this position, trapped inside a concrete labyrinth in Ukraine, while the world above them remained completely oblivious to the invisible poison spreading through the air. They believed they were conducting a routine safety test, a standard procedure to ensure the stability of one of the most powerful nuclear facilities on Earth. Instead, they were about to trigger a chain reaction that would rewrite human history and redefine our relationship with technology forever. The focus of this looming catastrophe was the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, located just 130 kilometers, or about 80 miles, north of Kyiv, Ukraine. At the heart of the facility sat reactor number 4, a massive Soviet RBMK reactor designed to produce immense amounts of electricity. The surrounding town of Pripyat had been built specifically to house the plant's workers and their young families, growing into a vibrant Soviet utopia of 50,000 people, filled with schools, parks, and a newly built amusement park. On the night of April 25th, a special test was scheduled to determine if the reactor's turbines could generate enough electricity to keep the cooling pumps running during a power failure. It was a well-intentioned exercise in safety, but it was plagued by delays, shifting schedules, and a critical lack of communication between the daytime staff and the less experienced night shift that took over the controls. As the clock ticked past midnight into April 26th, the operators began lowering the reactor's power to the required level for the test. However, the power dropped too quickly, plunging the reactor into an unstable and highly volatile state. To counteract this, operators made the fatal decision to withdraw almost all the control rods, which acted as the brakes for the nuclear reaction, out of the reactor core. The safety systems were intentionally disabled to prevent the test from being automatically interrupted. At 1:23 a.m., the official test began, and within seconds, the water keeping the core cool started to rapidly boil away. Without the cooling fluid and with the control rods removed, the nuclear reaction began to accelerate out of control, causing a massive surge in power. Realizing the danger, the chief operator pressed the emergency shutdown button, a command designed to plunge all control rods back into the core instantly. But a fatal flaw in the design of the Soviet rods meant their tips were made of graphite, a material that actually accelerates nuclear reactions before slowing them down. As the rods entered the core, they caused a localized explosion of unimaginable power. The immense pressure fractured the fuel channels, jamming the rods halfway and trapping the reactor in a runaway state. A second, even larger explosion tore through the building, blowing the 2,000-ton concrete lid clean off the reactor and exposing the burning core to the night sky. The immediate aftermath was a scene of pure chaos and confusion. Plant managers refused to believe the reactor was destroyed, sending young engineers into the ruins to investigate, exposing them to lethal doses of radiation within minutes. Local firefighters arrived at the scene dressed in standard canvas uniforms, completely unaware that the glowing debris they were stepping on was highly radioactive graphite. They fought the raging fires for hours, breathing in toxic smoke and absorbing immense amounts of radiation. Within days, many of these brave first responders would succumb to acute radiation sickness, their bodies failing from the inside out. For 36 hours, the Soviet government maintained a strict veil of secrecy, leaving the residents of Pripyat to carry on with their daily lives while a radioactive plume drifted silently over their homes. Children played outside in the falling ash, which they jokingly called Siberian snow. It wasn't until a nuclear plant in Sweden, over 1,000 kilometers, or about 600 miles away from Kyiv, detected soaring radiation levels that the Kremlin finally admitted something was terribly wrong. On the afternoon of April 27th, a fleet of 1,200 buses arrived in Pripyat, and residents were given just 2 hours to pack a single suitcase, told they would return in 3 days. They would never see their homes again. The long-term consequences of the disaster rippled across Europe and the entire world. To contain the open wound, Soviet authorities deployed hundreds of thousands of liquidators, soldiers, miners, and volunteers to clean up the radioactive debris and construct a massive concrete shelter known as the sarcophagus over the ruined reactor. Millions of acres of farmland were contaminated, and an official 30-kilometer or 18-mile exclusion zone was established around the plant, turning a once thriving region into a ghost town. The disaster caused thousands of cases of thyroid cancer, particularly among children, and left a deep psychological scar on an entire generation. Chernobyl ultimately became more than just a technological failure. It exposed the systemic flaws of secrecy and misinformation, accelerating the collapse of the Soviet Union itself. Today, the rusted Ferris wheel of Pripyat stands as a silent monument to the day the invisible enemy won, reminding us that the true cost of progress is sometimes measured in the history we are forced to leave behind.